Okay, today's going to be an introduction of Adobe Illustrator. So when you open up Illustrator, start out with a similar screen as with Photoshop, where you can open cloud documents and recent documents here, or you can create a new document. So I'm going to create a new document, and you can see here we have some presets which you can choose from the top, pretty much the exact same as Photoshop here. And I'm just going to work off of a recent, which is an 8.5 by 11 that I had set up. And just like Photoshop, you can set your width, your height, the orientation, you can switch them. So you see how they switch back and forth as I go from vertical right there to landscape there. We can choose the number of artboards, which is something we're going to dive into down the road. You can set the dimensions, so 8.5 by 11 inches, or if you would rather set it up by pixels, that's another option there. So we have all those options where you can choose the dimensions you want this to be. Down here we have the color mode. So in Illustrator we have two options, RGB color, CMYK. RGB color is what you use for any kind of digital distribution or any video. So if it's going to web, video, anything digital is going to be RGB. So that's what you'll use probably most of the time. CMYK is if it's going to print. So CMY color is good if you are sending it to a printer. And oops, that's all under advanced options. So if this tab is closed, you could just open it there. And then here it's the DPI, which is the resolution. 300 is good most of the time. It's since we're working in vector, this becomes a little less important to get that right than in Photoshop, because in Photoshop you're limited to pixels, and so if you recall, if you zoom way in on something in Photoshop, it'll start to pixelate, and the higher resolution you have in Photoshop, the less that'll happen. And then in Illustrator, it's vector based, so you can zoom in on something 1,000 times and it'll stay kind of like a hard line here. So I just chose 8.5 by 11. I didn't really change anything here as I was talking through it. So I'll just give that a moment to open up. So when you open up Adobe Illustrator, some of this menu is going to seem very familiar from what you've seen in Photoshop here. So to kind of start things off, up here, if you click on this is the exact same as the Workspace options in Photoshop. So this icon right here is the Workspace icon. And here we have some default layouts and presets for how your interface is laid out. And you can see here that I had like my own, which was slightly different here for another project where I'd kind of loaded up some smaller windows in here, and had my properties tab with my layers. It's, so you can customize that, and I'll review that in a later tutorial here, and I'm just going to choose essentials here for now. And so for essentials, this is a pretty good layout, honestly, for most things. It seems really simple, but this properties tab right here is really helpful, and we'll kind of dive into that soon here. So navigating around your document in Illustrator is pretty much the same as Photoshop. If you, let's see here. Sorry, I'm a little locked out of my screen here. Here we go. Okay. So you have the hand tool right here, which is H, and you can, if you click it, you can pan your document around. If you press Z, as in zoom, it'll kind of switch. These are all kind of within the same submenu here. So if you hold down one, you'll kind of get three options here. So Z is zoom. And so I'll hold down Z and I can click and I can zoom in. If I press Z and then Alt, I can zoom out. Or you can just hold down Z and then drag right, drag left. So I'm holding down Z, dragging right, now dragging left. Also, like Photoshop, if I type in Command plus 0, it'll bring the document to full view right there. Really a helpful shortcut there. The rotate view, this is a little different than Photoshop. So this isn't rotating the actual document, this is rotating our view of the document. So if you're just working and you're using your pen tool, and sometimes if you're like right-handed or left-handed and like you're kind of drawing across an angle, it helps to kind of, you know, just shift your paper to help draw that line a little bit. And that's what this tool is for. So that's Shift H is the shortcut here, and it's all under the same breakout menu there with the others. And in Photoshop, there's this tool as well. It's R instead of Shift and H in Photoshop, R for rotate. So in Illustrator, you can just press Shift and H, and it lets you rotate your document a little bit so you can reposition. If you hold Shift while dragging it, it'll kind of snap by 15-degree increments right there. So that's the main ways to kind of move in and out of the document. You can also, there's the Navigator window. So if you go to Windows and then down to Navigator, we get that same Navigator window as you get in Photoshop. It's like 5% different, but it's basically the same, where the small mountain zooms out, big mountain zooms in. We get this red box where we can drag around our view, and so we can kind of reposition our view into different corners. I really like the Navigator view, honestly, and I use it a fair amount. It's not for everybody though, and so, but those are kind of the options for getting around your document. So Command 0 right there to just get back to full screen. So that's kind of how you change your view. Very similar to Photoshop, just with a couple small differences there. We're gonna go into the Properties tab soon, but first let's talk about the Layers tab right here. So Layers in Adobe Illustrator, it's similar as Photoshop, but it's not quite the same. And so I'm going to need to make some objects to kind of show what's happening here. So I'm just going to use this tool in a second, which is just makes like a very basic rectangle, a very basic circle, etc. right here. So layers in Illustrator, let's start with the ways that it's similar. You can turn on and off the visibility by clicking the eye marker right there. You can lock a layer like Photoshop by pressing, it's slightly different, but same concept here. If you click in right here, this is the lock layer icon right there. So if you see that lock right there, that means that if you try to make something new in this layer, it won't let you do it. That can be super helpful. And you can also create new empty layers right here. So same as Photoshop that way. So you see I just created a new layer by pressing the plus button. As long as I have that layer selected and it highlights blue and I press the trash can, it'll delete. So that's also like Photoshop there. So a lot of similarities, but let's get into where it's different, because there's a pretty big difference here. In that in Photoshop, kind of a layer is contains a single object in Photoshop. And if you want to have multiple layers combined together into something, it's called a group in Photoshop. And there's a little folder button you can press here in Photoshop that you can make multiple layers and put them into a group. In Illustrator, a layer basically is a group, and it has sub-layers within it. And so if that sounds confusing, don't worry, it's not too bad. So I have layer 1 selected. So just keep in mind that I have layer 1 selected here. And I'm going to go over here and create some rectangles. In order to change the color of the rectangles, I have these two colors right here, of the primary color and then the fill color, or the stroke color. Sorry, the fill color right here and then the stroke color right there. The fill color is the main color. The stroke color we'll see in a second, but when you make a shape in Illustrator, it'll always kind of have an outline that's whatever color you choose there. So let's just choose two colors to show this. So I'll choose red for my fill color, and then I'll choose, let's see here, I'll choose like a neon yellow for the fill color. And so if I drag in a rectangle, we see a red rectangle, but we didn't see much of that yellow stroke color right there. And we'll kind of get into that in a moment, but I want to stay focused on layers here. So with layers, you see how there's this little triangle right here, and within that layer it contains all the objects that you create. So kind of like sublayers, I might call it sometimes, but it contains different shapes and objects here. So if I make a circle or an ellipse right here, you see it kind of adds into that layer. And as I keep adding objects, it keeps showing up within this layer here. And so a layer is like a group. So I can like lock that layer right there. And let's just say I create a layer 2 right here. And you see how layer 2 has this blue-ish highlight going around it. So that means it's currently selected. So now if I start making some stars here, so again, all under the same menu right here. If I start making some stars, it's now showing up in this layer 2. And so you just kind of can organize your scene this way. In terms of organization, it's really important to kind of name your stuff as you go, especially if you're working on like a mascot for a cereal box, like in our assignment coming up. It's going to get pretty complicated in there. You're going to have a lot of shapes. And too much of the time I see, like I'll open up a layer and then just see this, where there's nothing's named, the layer's not named, and it's confusing, you know, and you'll kind of add time. You'll add more time to your labor efforts if you don't name if you don't name things, rather than if you just take a second and name things as you go. So at a bare minimum, at least these layers, you know, if not the sub layers right there. So let's trash this. So you can trash it by either grabbing it and then dragging it down to the trash can right there. Let's see here, and that is generally the way I'll do that, but let me just, okay, get that. Oh, you can also reorder it here, so you can see I can drag and change the order of things. And so anything that's on top in Illustrator is going to show up over top the layer underneath it. So just to kind of demonstrate that for a second. So I'm just going to quickly delete layer 1, and I'll keep layer 2. I'm going to make a new layer, and I'll just flip this. So now it's going to be a yellowish object going over. I will make an ellipse. So you see how on layer 3, it's on top of layer 2, and so it shows up over it right there. So, oops, just getting some pop-ups there. So that's kind of how layer orders work right there. So next up on layers, there's kind of one more big thing I want to discuss with layers here, which is, let's go ahead and delete this, drag it to the trash. With this ellipse right here, you'll notice that we have this little circle. It's kind of the active, is called click to target. And it's, I kind of, if you hear me talking in class, I'll just say, and make the object or the layer active is kind of the term I'll use for it. And basically, let's just say, and I'm just gonna make another shape here. Oops. You can also drag objects from one layer to the next, just like that. So in layer 2, I have this hexagon. Layer 3, I have an ellipse. And so if you just select a layer, let's say I want to select the yellow ellipse, and I select that layer like this, you see it doesn't really activate anything there. So it's not like totally active. Since I have the move tool selected, it will, if I just click on it, it'll kind of get there. But if you have like a really complicated scene with a bunch of, you know, shapes on top of it, it might not select for you. So that's just to say, to make an object active for selection, you just have to click on this little circle right here, and then it becomes active. And you can see that it became active. So I'm selecting this red hexagon. I'm going to actually change the color so we can see it a little bit better. Oops, this is a problem with the Essentials layout. Sometimes these breakout menus just pop up. So you can kind of select the objects this way. So I'll press H, zoom over, and you can see that I have this red outline kind of showing up around the object as I select it right there. But it doesn't happen if I just select layer 3 and layer 2 by name. it changes depending on if I click the active circular icon right there. So if you want to edit a shape, you can select the little active marker right there. Let me just make another shape in here. And so let's say that you have, so we're focusing on layer 3 here. If you want to select all of the objects in a layer, you can just click this active icon on the layer next to a layer right there, and it selects both of them, as you can see. If you want to select one but not the other, you just click right here. And you can see I have this one selected, and if I click right here, I get this one selected. So let's see here. And so that's kind of diving into layers here, and we'll kind of dig into that some more. But let's now continue to move through the introduction to Adobe Illustrator here. Is remember that before we proceed any further, that Photoshop is different than Illustrator, and that if I zoom in on Illustrator here and I zoom in all the way, this thing does not pixelate at all. So that's all it really means when we're saying vector. Oops. So when we say vector, a shape here, like this one, is, and I'm going to turn off the stroke, and I'll go into the colors here in a minute here, but I'm just turning off the stroke so we can kind of see what's going on here a little bit better. I'll delete the other layer. So we have this line out here that we can change the shape of things. And so we're going to dive into that in a moment. That's going to be with a direct select tool right here. But first we need to go over the selection tool. And so the selection tool is the first tool in our toolbar right here to the left. And the shortcut for it is V. And V is the shortcut that you're going to be using a lot while you're using Illustrator here. And it is a lot like the Edit Free Transform tool in Photoshop. And so if you press V, you basically just move the whole object at once right there. And let me see if I can get this to show up. I want to see a square as well here just to help illustrate some things. And so on my computer right now, there's kind of some weird settings happening right here. Let me see if I can get this thing working again. So this might happen on your computer. On the school computer, when I was giving this demo just the other day, I didn't need to kind of go through this step, but on my computer there's a setting that I might be kind of messing up on that made the selection tool show up a little differently than it should. So I'll have to look into that. But we have the selection tool, and if you take your cursor and drag it to the center of the object, you see how the cursor looks like this. And then if I drag it to the center of the object, I get that box right there. And so that's just to indicate that I can move this object around and transform it. And some of you might not need to do this step. A lot of the times you'll get this, this will show up like the Edit Free Transform tool in Photoshop, where you get these little handles out here where you can scale it in, scale it out, and if you hold your cursor up here, it'll rotate. Just like that Edit Free Transform tool, except for the only difference is that it's flipped what the Shift button does, which is kind of annoying. So in Photoshop, if you're in Edit Free Transform and you don't hold down Shift, your object or your image or your layer will transform in proportion. And if you hold Shift in Photoshop, it'll kind of transform out of proportion. And so it's just flipped here. So if you want it to stay in proportion, hold down Shift. And if you want to bring it out of proportion, don't hold down Shift. I know that's a word salad right there, but hopefully that makes sense. And so if your screen appears like mine, where you click V and this is what you get, you might need to just click this Free Transform tool or press E on your keyboard right there. And now I'm getting kind of what I'm supposed to get right there. And so now you can see here that I can scale it in, and I'm not holding Shift right now, so it just kind of goes any which way I drag it. I can scale it out, and again, not holding Shift, so it's scaling any which way. I'll press Edit Undo. And again, just a recap, I pressed V and then I pressed E, which is free transform tool here at the bottom. And if I hold the cursor in the corner, on the outside corner right here, I can rotate this. And one thing that's nice is in the properties window, which is something I promised we would kind of jump into, is what the properties window does is it's like the top bar in Photoshop. If you recall in Photoshop, if we click the brush tool, the menu at the top would change and kind of map onto what the brush tool needs. And so that's the same here, where you see we're on the rectangle tool right here, and so these are a bunch of controls that are helpful for the rectangle tool. And if I switch to the text tool, okay, I had to click it to get it to go, but you can see right here that it changed. So you have to kind of, unlike Photoshop, you have to kind of click it to kind of get it active right here. So I click the text tool, which is just how you write text, right? Hello. And you can kind of change some parameters here. We're going to do a deep dive on that soon. So let me just delete this. So I just selected it and pressed delete. And so here, I'm going to just select that rectangle box again, that shape, so we can kind of get back to this properties window right here. If you recall, I pressed E for the free transform tool in Illustrator. And if I rotate here, you see how right there, that shows how many degrees it's rotated from its original position right there. So you can just go in, click 90, and I guess that won't show because this is a square, so I'll type in 45. And you can see we have a diamond shape right there. I'll kind of change the shape of this a little bit just so this becomes clear in a moment. I can also click this and that flips it horizontally, or click this and that flips it. It's hard to tell, but it's flipping it vertically right now. And I can just open up this tab for rotate, and I can just rotate that back to 0 degrees again, or you can do 210. You know, so there's some, you can either type it in by just dragging in there and then typing something in right there, or you can go click that arrow and expand out this menu. And let's see here. So that's the basic free transform tool. A lot of you can just press V and you'll get this. So there's kind of something, again, in my settings that is kind of causing that. So I'm going to zoom out. And so V, and then sometimes for some of you E might be needed to kind of get the transform the whole object in this way kind of thing. And so again, if I hold shift and I scale it, it stays in proportion right there. So I can hold shift and grab the corners right here. Oops. Getting really sloppy there with my controls. And that'll scale in proportion. And you can grab these handles here and change the shape that way. So that is the main selection tool right there. The direct select tool is A, and what that does is if you look at the shape right here, you can see these 4 red boxes. So I'll press A, and you can see that these little, what I call little target icons, show up there. So 1, 2, 3, 4 inside of these. And so just take note of that for a second here. So with the direct select tool, by default, when you just click on it initially, all of the anchor points, these are called anchor points right here, these red boxes, will be selected. If I just click on one of them, you can see that box turns red, and then these 4 boxes become hollow white boxes right there, so they're no longer selected. And so what the direct select tool allows me to do is if I just click on the selected box and I move it around, I can kind of customize the shape here and drag it any which way I want it to go. So I'll press edit undo. And so if I hold shift and grab 2 anchor points, I can drag 2 of them at a time. And then if I click off of it and then click in again, all 4 anchor points are selected. So now it's moving all of them at the same time right here. So Um, that's a really helpful tool that we'll be using a lot. So V and A are shortcuts that you'll be using a lot for these two shortcuts. And so what are these little target things in here? So right now, all 4 anchor points are selected. So if I grab one target point and I drag it from right to left, it doubles the number of the anchor points, and it kind of softens or rounds out the edges right there. And so whenever you have a hard edge, you should get this target icon as an option that allows you to kind of change the shape of it like that. So if all 4 edges are, all 4 anchor points are selected, which they are right now, if I grab one target, it'll grab them all, and you can round it out until it gets to like a pill form, or you can have it be like a subtle bevel that occurs right there. And notice, let's see here, it gets a little funkier once you've already rounded out, because so now if I want to just control this corner right here, I just need to select one of these anchor points, and now I can use the target icon right there to round out one edge but not the others, just by clicking one of these two. It doesn't matter which one of those two you select right there, and you can round it out. And so that's a basic introduction to the direct select tool, but there's more to it here. And so right now we're basically, I showed you one way to round out your shapes, right? Like that, if you have a hard edge, a way to round it out. But there's another way that's more important, which is called using a Bezier. And so here, when I select just one anchor point right there, you can see that it's straight on the bottom side, and then it's curved on the top side. So the reason that it's straight right here, even if I pull it out like that, it's still, you see that still remains a straight line even if I pull it out. That's because this anchor point doesn't have a Bezier on that bottom side, but now it does on the top side. And again, a reason this Bezier was created in the first place, if you recall, is because we grabbed the target icon right there. And so if I grab the Bezier and drag it, I can change and customize the curve here. And so this is something that you'll learn best just by feeling it out and messing with it. But if you grab the Bezier handle, you can kind of change the shape of it this way and get control of the shape. So let me delete the shape overall and continue to kind of expand talking about the Bezier curve tool. So A is the shortcut I'm going to press. I'm going to press this anchor point right there. This is an ellipse, and so it's rounded on each side. And since it's rounded on each side and it doesn't have any hard edges, you can see here that even when it's selected, I don't get any of those target icons right there. And then when I click on an anchor point, I get a Bezier on each side. So changing the shape of this, I can click in the anchor point right here, and then I can move the whole thing, turn it into a little smiley face, or I can bring it up, turn it into an egg. If you hold shift while dragging it, it'll bring it, oops. There we go. So I have to click it and drag it and then hold shift, and then it snaps it so it just goes straight up and down. You can drag it off axis if you pull it, but it has like a snapping point where it goes straight up and down. And again, if I do that again and drag it left or right, it stays level left or right there. So shift tool, really helpful on Illustrator. It comes up a lot. So whenever you're kind of in doubt and you're trying to make something with some hard edges, or not hard edges, sorry, you're trying to make something geometric, shift can be a really helpful tool with a lot of different tools up here in Illustrator. So the anchor point, you can move it around there. It's got a Bezier handle on each side, and so you can kind of change the shape this way. And notice here that when I change the angle of one handle, it changes the angle of the other angle right there, like a seesaw. But if I change the length of one handle, it doesn't change the length of the other. So I could hold shift, bring that all the way in there, and then give myself a hard edge on one side and then kind of keep it rounded on the other. And then notice that as soon as I got that hard edge again, we got our little target point where we could grab it and then round it back out again. But I can also still grab this handle right here and move it around. And so I'll press Command 0. The direct select tool, so shortcut A, is just how you kind of customize these shapes right here. And so getting acquainted with how to use the Bezier curve tool, or the Beziers, is really helpful here. And one note that I'll get into here is, do you notice how here on this bottom side we have a really nice rounded shape on the bottom of this circle? Notice that we have 1, 2, 3 Beziers right there. And just take note that we don't have like 15 Beziers to create that curved line. If you want like a really clean curved line, it's best to kind of try to make the shape with as few anchor points and Beziers as possible, and use the Beziers to your advantage and kind of create that rounded shape. So continuing to kind of talk about this a little bit, let's talk about the pen tool, because hopefully it makes sense what you've seen so far with these shapes, right? Like we've kind of gone over this a little bit with a rectangle, ellipse, and polygon tool. Just drag it on. If you hold shift, it'll kind of make the shape for you right here. Oops, sorry, it'll kind of keep it flat for you right there. And if you type V, it lets you move the whole shape around. And you might need to press E to get the whole free transform tool right there. And if you type A, it allows you to change the anchor points. And you can round them out if you want by clicking on the targets if there's a hard edge. And then if you have a Bezier, you can grab the handle and pull it out and customize your shape right there. So let's delete both of these, that you want to draw out your own shape right here. And I'm going to switch this around a little bit. So I'm going to change my color. So I'm right here, I have it so that I have a solid color, green, and then I have no fill. And so empty is this little Ghostbusters X sign right there when you have colors right there. And so I'm going to show the pen tool next, which is a great way to make your own customized shapes here. And to draw that out correctly, what I might like to do is I might like to switch this by using this little button right there. Just swap my fill and my stroke color right there. And then I'm going to double click on the stroke color and just change it to black. Press OK. And so this will be a helpful way to kind of start out with the pen tool. So pen tool right here, shortcut P. And this is a super important tool to kind of get used to in Illustrator here. And you'll click, and if you do just quick taps right here, so I'm just on my pen just doing normal ordinary left clicks right here, you'll get hard edges right there. And if you want to close off a loop here, I can either stop early just by pressing return on my keyboard and just have this be the shape, or if I want to close off the shape, I just drag my cursor to the first point, and you can see my cursor gets this little O at the bottom of it, indicating we're closing off the shape, right? And then so I'll just click, and now we have a finished shape right there. And kind of like the polygon tool, I'll just press V to get out of that. And like the polygon tool, we have hard edges right here. And if I select it and press A, you can see I get all my little anchor points again, so I can round it out if I like. It did it all at once because all the anchor points were selected at the same time, but if I just want to round out this anchor point, for instance, I just select that one, click on the little target, round it out right there. And so that's one way to use the pen tool. Using it again, so just P. I was tapping before, so just doing quick taps, but if you click and you hold, it'll give you a Bezier that you can kind of change your shape, and you can see, if you look in there, the line is previewed red, so I can see what the line is going to look like before it even draws, which is really helpful here. And so I can just click and drag and kind of get some new points here. And so I can alternate between hard edges and rounded edges if I like. If I hold shift, it snaps to left and right or vertical right there. So holding shift can be helpful here. That's kind of what I mean about geometric shapes, or what I was talking about with geometric shapes earlier. So I can click here and just get used to the handle tool. So the longer you drag it out, the longer the handles will be right there. And typically short handles mean that there's going to be a little more, here I'm going to draw with short handles. You'll get more defined shapes like that. And then if you draw long handles, you get more kind of round shapes like this. And so holding shift right there, you can get a variety of shapes right here using the pen tool. And imagine if you had a drawing right here. This is kind of looking like a surreal, badly drawn, like wolf from the side or something here with a zit. You can kind of customize your shapes here. So you can imagine you have a drawing here, and then you got your shape right there. And you can, after you draw it in, something that's really nice about Illustrator is that all these shapes are non-destructive, meaning that I drew it in, but I can still manipulate it. So I typed A, and then I'm dragging anchor points here, and I can mess around with this here. And so, yeah, you can just kind of get some good control happening with this. And I might need, oops, I lost it there. There we go. Okay, and so, yeah, get used to these Beziers here, because this is kind of one of the big keys of getting good with Illustrator. And just keep in mind the shift tool is there, and you can kind of change these handles around. So clicking on the pen tool, and I'm holding down the pen tool, we're just kind of going from top to bottom, because it's kind of laid out in a good way, where it's kind of most important to least important, going from top to bottom almost here, is we now move on to the anchor point tool right here. And so the anchor point tool lets you kind of make some adjustments to anchor points. So you notice here that if I click on a line, it doesn't add a new anchor point. It does allow me to drag it though, which is nice. So you can kind of move your points around that way using the anchor point tool, which again is, you look here, is Shift and C. So Shift and C is another shortcut that'll be good to memorize. And so that's one way you can use the anchor point tool, is kind of just grab a line and drag it around. But the way I tend to use it even more is if you have an anchor point right like this, and so we have a hard anchor point right there, and I'm not interested in using this target to round it out, and I'd rather use a Bezier, is you can use the anchor point tool to add a Bezier. So if I just click on that hard anchor point and then drag it with the anchor point tool, I now get a Bezier that I can control right here. And then if you have, alternatively, if you have a rounded point like this, and you're like, hey, I want this to be a hard edge, you Shift C or the anchor point tool, and then you just click on the anchor point, and it does the opposite, where it'll make it a hard edge there, and you now have access to the target icon to round it out. So Shift C, really helpful here. Let's say that we have this straight line right here, and you're like, okay, I want to add an anchor point onto here, because the anchor point tool only lets us kind of move the edge around right there. So we got this right here, which is add anchor point. And I think with the pen tool too, let me just try it. Yeah, with the pen tool, you can also just, you can either use the add anchor point tool right here, shortcut plus, and you can add anchor points right there, or you can just use the pen tool, and then if you just draw right on the line to where you see normally I have a little star next to it, and if I hover it over the line, I get a plus next to it. So that means that it's going to add a new anchor point right there. So it's just the pen tool or the add anchor point tool right there that's under it. And something that's nice about Illustrator here is, do you see here how I had, I'm going to press P plus minus, which is also delete anchor point tool. So I'm just going to delete that out. Ooh, maybe I don't want to do that. I'm just going to press Command and Z. So something that's nice about adding anchor points right here is, you see I have one anchor point there, and then I have one anchor point all the way over here, and then nothing else for that line right there. And so if I add an anchor point, do you see how that line doesn't change shape at all? So that's really helpful because it just automatically computes what the Bezier should look like to kind of keep that shape 100% intact to the way you had it. So you can just click it, add an anchor point, and then if you want to change it, you can kind of use the handle, the anchor point and the handles here to customize it, gain control of it. So that's kind of the add anchor point tool, or sorry, yeah. And then the shortcut again for that is when you're in P, if you press plus, it'll kind of automatically go into it, and if you press minus, it'll automatically go into delete anchor point. But you can see when you delete an anchor point, it does change the shape again. So sometimes it's best just to press Command Z to get out of that. So I'm going to press H, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And so that's kind of the main overview of the pen tool, anchor points, and Beziers right there. And it's something that just kind of takes practice. And once you get good with it, it's really helpful here. Let's say that I want to remove the shape right here. You can just go P. So I'm typing P, then minus, which again is this tool right there. And I can just click. You have to click like right on it in order to get it to go. You can kind of delete some shapes right there. And get your shape. So let's see here. Next up, I'd like to talk about colors. So right now, the stroke is black. If I click off it, you can see we have a black outline going around it. So that's what the stroke is. If you go under the properties menu, I'm going to talk about that for a second. And so right now, the properties is kind of like the document overall. So I need to make sure that the layer is selected here. And now you can see that the fill, the stroke is showing up, as well as some other controls over here. And let me just close that out. So right now there is an empty fill right there, and then the stroke is black. If I want to change the color of the stroke, again, I can click on it right here, and we can change it from white, looking at the left, drag it down to gray right here. If we keep it all the way to the left, and then black all the way at the bottom left, and then top right, we can make it yellow. And we got the rainbow right here, so we can kind of choose between any color from red to purple to blue to green to yellow back to red again. And then we got dark green right here. And if you want like a desaturated green, you just kind of grab it somewhere in the middle. And so let's say that I want like a dark green stroke that's relatively highly saturated. I'll do right there, click OK. So it's probably hard to see, but right now the stroke is a dark green. So the thickness of it is 1 pixel. So if I want the stroke to be thicker, you can click, you can expand this and kind of choose some of these options here and thicken it up right there. And additionally, you can just go up 1 pixel at a time by clicking these little guys right here, these little arrows. And so that's the stroke. The fill right now is empty. So I can either click on it here and kind of choose some options in here, or I can click on this color right here, double click, and I will change it to a light blue, press OK. And we have a fill going here. Kind of moving down. So again, we're in the properties tab right here next to layers. Moving downward, we have the opacity slider. So let me make a new shape just to help show this a little bit. So we have a new shape going over top it. I drew it on top, so, and it's at 100% opacity, so we can't see the object underneath it. If you click this and drag it down, you can see that it adds some translucency. So if we can either use the slider by clicking on this arrow and dragging the slider right there, or you can click in here and then type in a number. So I can type in 50, I'll be at 50% opacity. And you can mix and match colors a little bit here. So you can see here we have blue. So this object is yellow. This object's blue, drag it over, we get green. So you can kind of do some color theory stuff with this. And so those are some of the main controls right there under appearance for, especially when we've got a shape selected right here. So just we'll kind of dive deeper into the properties window, but something else in the properties window that can be helpful sometimes that I'd just like to go ahead and talk about real quick is, whoops, what am I doing? Command 0. And I'm going to just delete that shape. And we have this shape right here. I have it selected. So now the Properties tab, it opens up all of its settings right here. We have these Align tabs right here. And so these Align tabs are not super helpful for drawing a character per se, but this will be helpful down the road when we're designing the box layout. And something that I like about it is, I'll just press E so we get the free transform on this thing. We can align this object onto our artboard and center it right here. So let's just say we have our object drawn right there and it's outside of the artboard right here. This one centers it horizontally, this one vertically, and then we can also punch it either to the left corner, or sorry, the left side, right side, top side, bottom side right there. So right there, I just clicked it to align it to the left side of the artboard. Right here, I'm centering it horizontally. There's punching it to the right side there. We can align it to the top. We can center it vertically, or we can align it to the bottom. And then finally, we can center it totally just by center, and now it's 100% centered in the center of the document here. And I don't know if you can see it right here, but there's a little greenish target mark right there that's showing the center point of this object or the shape that we have here. And so when I do the center controls right here, it's computing it based off of that right there. And when you knock it to the side right here, it's knocking it to the side based on this line right here. So the outer box is how it computes how you're moving it to the top, bottom, left, and right. And then the little center mark that's kind of hard to see right there is the center, how you kind of center an object right here. And so just imagine that you're doing the design layout for a box and you're trying to kind of keep a clean design going. These controls can be super helpful for stuff like that. And I keep pressing spacebar because that's how I pan around a Photoshop document. And let's see here. So those are kind of the main controls that you need to know in order to kind of get up and running in Adobe Illustrator. Life's going to be hard if you don't get all these kind of going at 100% here. And as this class progresses, we're gonna be going over more and more stuff here. But it's really important to kind of get this foundation in place right here. So just to kind of recap, we talked about how you can move around a document from your perspective. So you can, for instance, press H and you can pan. You can hold down Z and zoom in and out. If you hold Shift H, you can rotate your document just so, like as you're drawing with your pen tool or something, you can kind of change, you know, the angle of the paper here. We went over layers, and remember these kind of active buttons right here to make an object active so that you can move it around. And creating new layers, deleting layers. There's the selection tool right here, which selects the whole object and lets you move it around. For some of you, you might get the free transform controls on it automatically. For others, like on my computer, you might need to press E for the free transform tool to free transform a whole object at the same time here. So if I'm not holding Shift, I can change it like that. If I hold Shift, oops, it's a little picky. The free transform tool. Come on. There we go. If I hold Shift, I can scale it uniformly. And then going down, the direct select tool, we can change anchor points right here. So the anchor point, I'm grabbing it right there and changing the shape. When you have a straight anchor point and you have it selected, you always get that little target. And keep in mind that I'm selecting one anchor point at a time, so I'm getting one target at a time. If I click off of the object with the direct select tool and then I select back on it again, I get all of them at the same time. And with them all selected, if I drag one target icon, I get them all at the same time right there. And if you have a rounded edge, you get Beziers. One way you can add a rounded edge is if you go to the pen tool and use the anchor point tool, which is Shift and C. You can click and drag like that and get Beziers where there were no Beziers before. And if you have Beziers and you want no Beziers and you want a hard point right there, again, just using the same tool, just click on it and it'll do the opposite. So that's kind of the secondary function of the pen tool. The pen tool is the tool where if you click and drag, you can click and drag and get these anchor points. And then if you do click tap to get hard points right there. And then if you close off a point, you get a little O at the bottom of your cursor. And you can close off a shape there. And you can, just like other shapes, you can change the shape of it. You can add anchor points right here. And with the pen with a plus icon next to it right there, you can see as I add new anchor points that it doesn't change the shape because Illustrator intelligently computes, how to keep that shape intact. That being said, try to draw the shapes with as few anchor points as possible right there. So I'm just going to press Command Z to get it back to where it was. If you have an anchor point and you're like, I need to get rid of this thing, we got delete anchor point right there, which is the shortcut for it is the minus button. And we can delete it out right there. And finally, additionally, we just went over the basics of color. We got the fill color or the primary color right here. You can access it by double clicking it. You can access the stroke color by double clicking it here. And at any point you can make either of these empty by, it's this little box right here that says none. So if I have this object selected right now, and if I want no fill, I can just click on this button right here, and now it's transparent, and it's going underneath that other layer, so I need to drag it on top. And now it's transparent right there. Same thing for the stroke, and I can switch them back and forth by clicking the small arrow right there.